What makes someone qualified to run for office? Sounds like a fair question, right? One that voters ask. It's one that I got asked. What makes you qualified? At first, I did what you're supposed to do. I started mentally drafting the resume. Marine Corps, Desert Storm, life experience, business, perspective, independence, the usual greatest hits. But then I stopped and thought, wait a minute, what makes them qualified? The incumbent, sure, he's done the job a couple of times, but whether he's done it well, that's not a qualification, that's an opinion. The Democratic challenger, also a veteran, stepping up, also asking voters for a shot. And me, same deal, different letter next to my name. So if we're being honest, we're not all that different on paper, which raises a slightly uncomfortable question. Why are they considered viable while I'm treated like I wandered into the wrong room? So let's pull back the curtain on something that most voters feel but rarely see clearly. Who actually decides which candidates are viable and why? In theory, anyone can run for office, but here's where it gets interesting, because in reality, especially here in Texas, it's not really about qualifications. Access to the ballot is where the race is quietly decided. See, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you run in a primary, you win, and boom, you're on the ballot. Automatic, clean, simple, because you're in the club. Now, the Libertarian Party in Texas has ballot access, so I am on the ballot for November. But if you're an independent or other alternate party candidate who doesn't already have ballot access, oh, now it's a scavenger hunt designed by somebody who really doesn't want you to find the prize. You have to gather thousands of signatures from registered voters who did not vote in the primary within a narrow time window under strict validation rules. So let me translate that into plain English. If you don't have ballot access, you have to find people who are politically engaged enough to sign a petition, but somehow not engaged enough to have voted in the primary. And you have to do it fast, perfectly, and at scale. Think about it. If the barrier to entry is high enough, you don't need to beat more competitors. You just need to make sure that fewer can get in. And over time, that creates something powerful. Not just two dominant parties, but a shared assumption that those are the only two parties that are legitimate. Let that sink in. The system says anyone can run, but then quietly adds, as long as you clear a much higher bar if you're not in the duopoly club. That's not about qualifications. That's an obstacle course. And here's our humiliating kick in the crotch. If you do clear those hurdles, if you're not in the club, you're not unqualified. You're just invisible. You may be on the ballot or not, but you're not asked to be in the debates. You're not asked to be in the conversation. So before you even hear from candidates like me, the system has already decided who's allowed in the room. And then, because this is where it gets brilliant, layer in media coverage. Not as the villain, but definitely not as the hero either. Most outlets don't sit in a room and say, let's just ignore the independent and third-party candidates. They don't have to. Instead, they rely on three primary signals: polling, funding, and party backing. And those signals are already shaped by ballot access laws. So what happens? Well, candidates who clear the system's barriers get coverage, gain recognition, look viable. Candidates who struggle against those barriers get less coverage, stay unknown, get labeled as long shots. And to be fair, the media didn't write the rules, but they absolutely amplify them. Because if you only cover the candidates who already cleared the barriers, you reinforce the idea that those are the only candidates that matter. It's a causality feedback loop. Ballot access limits who gets in. Media coverage limits who gets seen. And voters are left choosing from a menu that was pre-selected for them. And then we all sit around every election cycle and go, wow, how do the same two parties keep dominating like it's some kind of mystery? It's not a mystery, it's a system. They don't just win, they're the only ones that most people ever hear about. And look, this is the part where I'm supposed to get all defensive, where I say, no, I am qualified. Just look at my experience, my service, my ideas. But just to be clear, this isn't about me. If it were about me, I'd go get a hobby, something a lot less stressful like juggling chainsaws. No, this is about whether voters are actually getting a choice or just the appearance of one. Because if qualifications really mattered, if that's what we were really cared about, then we'd be comparing ideas. We'd be debating records. We'd be weighing judgment, character, and vision, not checking whether someone managed to navigate a bureaucratic maze designed in the early 20th century to protect two brands. Because if access is restricted, visibility is uneven, and legitimacy is assigned before debate even begins, then the real question isn't what makes me qualified, it's who was allowed to compete in the first place. And that has consequences. It means that new ideas struggle to break through, accountability weakens, and elections feel predictable even when they shouldn't be. Over time, people stop believing the system represents them at all. So instead of what makes me qualified, maybe better questions are, why does a system that limits our choices get to decide that at all? Why do we treat ballot access like a neutral filter when it keeps functioning more like a gatekeeper? Why do we equate visibility with viability? And why, in a state that prides itself on independence, do we accept a political structure that quietly tells you you can choose anyone you want as long as it's one of these two? So yeah, I'll answer the question, what makes me qualified to run for office? The same thing that makes anyone qualified. A willingness to serve, a set of ideas, and the courage to put both in front of voters, to make a case to the voters and be held accountable for it. But whether you ever get to hear that is not about qualifications. It's about whether the system lets you through the door. And maybe that's the part that we should be questioning. Because if that's the standard, then maybe qualification wouldn't be decided by party structures, signature hurdles, or media assumptions. Maybe it would be decided by you. Look, as a libertarian, I already know the chances of me winning the seat fall somewhere between a snowball's chance in hell and, did you hear something? But I'm running because I don't think a system should pre-select your choices. If I earned your vote, it should be because you heard me, not because I was one of the only names you were given. So if you've ever wondered why certain candidates are treated as serious while others are dismissed before you even hear from them, it's not always about merit. Usually it's about a system that decides who gets seen, who gets heard, and who gets left out. And once you see that, you really can't unsee it. So the next time someone asks what makes a candidate qualified, you might want to ask something else first. Who decided that they weren't? Because a democracy where access is controlled isn't really asking who's qualified. It's asking who's pre-approved.